shocking truth revealed. The orphanage boy who changed everything for this billionaire's life. Mia's fingers danced over the greasy grill as the smell of breakfast filled the small diner, but her heart felt heavy. The diner's weathered walls bore the weight of dreams unfulfilled. Each morning began with hope, layers of bacon sizzling, eggs cracking, but today a tweet-like urgency gnawed at her. Ethan's laughter usually rang like sunshine, but in the shadow of recent events, silence loomed. She had always been tough, a single mother who juggled a modest diner and a vivid 10-year-old. Now, with every plate served, images of Ethan's bright eyes filled with confusion tormented her mind. Her nights were fraught with insomnia. She'd often sit near the window of their cluttered living room, drinking lukewarm coffee as she wrestled with the chaos of bills and dwindling dreams. Yesterday they had an argument, the kind of spat a mother never wants to have. Ethan believed in fairness, and she'd had to make choices, hard, ugly choices. If only she could turn back time to find an easier way to keep them together. Then, as fate would have it, tragedy struck. A car accident took Mia's life in an instant, leaving Ethan adrift, and, by a horrible twist of fate, within the walls of an orphanage, fraying his sense of security. The stark reality dragged him down like a stone. Alone in the bleak room filled with unfamiliar faces, the weight of his new existence pinched his spirit, but ignited his imagination. He spun tales for the other orphans, epic stories of knights rescuing captives, or worlds where love conquered all. His voice a sanctuary in the silence of despair. As Ethan shared his stories, bravery, kindness, little by little, hope seeped back into their lives. Yet in those quiet moments, the ache of separation pounded at him, the insatiable yearning for Mia. On the other side of town, billionaire Blake Kensington swirled a drink in his hand at a charity gala, surrounded by people who only saw numbers and influence. He had everything, money, power, but happiness slipped through his fingers like sand. Each laugh and cheer echoed hollow in his chest. Wealth felt like a gilded cage. He longed to break free. When he heard of the orphanage's need for better resources, something primal stirred within him. He had planned to support a cause, yet the gnawing questions returned. What was the point? There, as he walked through, he encountered Ethan, drawing an audience with his words, a young boy whose stories danced with hope like sunlight breaking through a storm. As he watched Ethan weave tales filled with dimensions of life Blake have long buried, a longing ignited. Could he, would he, dare invite this brave boy into his lonely fortress? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications, so you don't. Don't miss the next videos, and if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. But in that stark moment of clarity, Blake was forced to confront the grinding guilt of his past associations, a world of avarice and corruption beckoning him back, calling him to conform to the familiar shadows of opulence. Ethan's innocent yearning for a better life weighed down on Blake's conscience, pushing him toward the edge of a decision. Then came the revelation, a buried family secret that shook the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about integrity and fortune. Memories he had never faced crashed against him. What if he was everything he feared, and how he chose to use his wealth could unleash waves of consequence? Tension spiraled within him. Would he retreat to privilege, or dare to uncover the truth that might connect him to a boy who tenderly spoke of family, even amid despair? Each moment gnawed at him, the pull between his comfortable yet hollow existence and the invitation of a compassionate reality laced with uncertainty was excruciating. Would he emerge as a renegade willing to challenge his profoundly misplaced sense of self, or fall victim to the ghosts tethering him to a discontented life? Ethan buried himself in his stories. The orphanage walls were painted in muted colors, but in his mind, they transformed into vibrant landscapes where heroes triumphed and hope blossomed. He never wanted to leave the tales behind. They were his lifeline, a connection to the person he missed most. Each character he created was infused with elements of his mother, her laughter, her courage, the countless lessons embedded in every bedtime story. As the days passed, the other children began to look up to him, yawning wide-eyed, their imaginations ignited beneath his spell. However, while he spun tales to shield others from their harsh reality, he wrestled with his own. Each night he lay awake, fighting the choking sadness that came when he closed his eyes. Where was Mia? Why couldn't she hold him against the dark thoughts creeping into his mind? The longing for her touch suffocated him. Somber days blurred together with echoes of memories, diner conversations over pancakes, her infectious smile that propelled waves of loneliness crashing against his spirit. On the other side of town, Blake sat across from executives in a swanky boardroom, numbers and projections swirling as they discussed the next big investment. Faces blurred, systems lost meaning, and all he could grasp was an overwhelming sense of dislocation. His fingers traced over the cold surface of the conference table, and he felt like a ghost haunting a past that no longer fit. It was becoming increasingly clear to him the riches had not fortified his heart, but instead hollowed it out. He felt trapped in a world of facades. The notification about the orphanage's needs buzzed incessantly on his phone, a reminder that reality still existed outside his lavish bubble. Could he dare to reach for something beyond the glittering facades of life? As he considered the bridge he had to cross, images of Ethan's storytelling stirred within him. What would it mean to embrace a life intertwined with a child so vulnerable and full of dreams? He had told himself countless times that charity was merely a business opportunity, a way to polish his reputation. But something in Ethan's narratives compelled him to own a deeper understanding. Could these vibrant tales be a call to resurrect his own buried aspirations? The thought ignited a flicker of determination in Blake. This would be an uncharted path, a chance to step beyond his gilded cage and face the truth he had avoided for so long. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan clung to the stories he spun as a shield, until one afternoon he caught sight of a familiar figure by the gates of the orphanage. Blake Kensington, larger than life, surrounded by whispers and glances of intrigue. The billionaire hadn't come for mere curiosity. Ethan felt it in the air. An invitation pulsed through the crowd, a chance moment that could tether them both in an unexpected alliance or painful clash. He instinctively took a step back, hesitating as fear gripped him. Was he ready to confront someone who could change everything, yet remind him of all he had lost? Blake approached him, eyes intense with purpose, a swirl of conflict fighting behind his corporate demeanor. For both, this meeting could serve as a powerful nexus of separation and connection. Would Ethan weave tales that could draw Blake out of his self-imposed exile, or would the weight of the past hold him in ghostly chains? The air crackled with unspoken potential, and as they stood on the precipice of something monumental, each quietly confronted the question that haunted them both. Was it possible to redefine their lives together amidst such fragile hopes? Ethan's heart raced as Blake drew nearer, the billionaire's confident strides echoing around the quiet grounds of the orphanage. This man was everything he had imagined, possibly even more extraordinary than the figures in his stories. But as Blake approached, it became painfully clear that this encounter could thrust Ethan into a reality he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Blake stopped several feet away, taking in the scene. The weathered facade of the orphanage contrasting dramatically with his sleek, tailored suit. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, revealing the tension between them. Ethan felt the weight of expectations and the burden of memories. His mother's absence, the stories that offered escapers. Would he be able to fend off the daunting shadows, or would he find himself ensnared in a web of vulnerability that Blake represented? Ethan, right? Blake's voice was deep, steady, a stark difference from the racing thoughts in Ethan's mind. A nod barely escaped Ethan's lips, connected by an invisible thread of anticipation. What did this man want from him? The air felt thick. Each moment stretched tantalizingly long, as if it held the weight of a life-changing revelation. "I've heard about your stories," Blake continued, attempting a smile that felt forced. "They say you can make even the most mundane things seem magical." Ethan swallowed hard, caught off guard by the praise. His stories weren't mere art. They were echoes of a lost connection, pieces of a mother's love scattered throughout his memories. How could they be so important to Blake, a man seemingly far removed from the struggles of children? "Why are you here?" Ethan managed to say, his voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Blake took a step closer, his posture shifting from corporate stoicism to an intriguing vulnerability. "I need to understand why I'm drawn to your tales. They resonate, and maybe I could learn something from them, perhaps something about myself." Ethan studied him, memories swirling. This billionaire, seemingly untouched by hardship, was now seeking the lessons buried in the depths of childhood creativity. Could a man like Blake truly have lost his way? Did he even understand the fragility of life's simple joys? However, doubt gnawed at Ethan's resolve. His imagination had created wonderful worlds and characters, but did he possess the strength to guide an outsider like Blake through the tangled alleys of his own sorrow? "What do you want from me?" Ethan's voice was firmer now, wielding a confidence that surprised even him. "I want to understand," Blake replied, his forthrightness cutting through the air like a knife. "I'm suffocating in my own success, and I can't keep ignoring the pull of something deeper. Maybe we could help each other." Ethan's heart thudded with uncertainty. Could he risk stepping out of the shadows where he felt safe? Engaging with Blake might lead him to discover not only new possibilities, but also profoundly hidden fears, the fear of being let down once again. As he contemplated the gravity of their meeting, Ethan remembered how he had once woven the story of a king who had to confront his past to break the curse on his people. The parallels sent a shiver down his spine. Could he play a part in someone else's story for once, risking his own narrative in the process? "I'll have to think about it," Ethan finally said, allowing caution to weigh against the tempting prospect of change. As Blake nodded in understanding, Ethan felt the air shift around them, the crackling uncertainty morphing into something more, a bond forged from shared vulnerabilities, an unexpected chance to reshape their destinies. But even as he walked away from Blake, Ethan grappled with the realization that he stood on the edge of transformation. The question lingered. Would embracing this opportunity lead him to the fulfillment he longed for, or sink him deeper into the pain he fought to escape? In the distance, a new story began to unfold. Unforeseen consequences and the possibility of liberation or heartbreak. The thought echoed in his mind, relentless. What awaited him if he dared to share not only his stories, but a part of himself? Ethan's decision hung in the air, cloaked in uncertainty. As he left Blake standing amid the fading light, a potential ally, or perhaps another shadow of his past, too close for comfort, yet too enticing to ignore. Ethan woke the next morning with Blake's words replaying in his mind like a relentless loop. The sunlight streamed through the cracked windows of the orphanage, illuminating dust particles swirling through the air, a metaphor for the chaos brewing within him. What had he gotten himself into? The thought lingered uncomfortably as he stared at his worn notebook, its pages filled with fragments of stories waiting to be shared. He wanted to write, but the usual flow of creativity felt stifled by the weight of potential. As he sat on his bed, he couldn't shake off the feeling that this was a defining moment, one where he could shape his future. The question was how deep he was willing to dive into the uncharted waters of collaboration with Blake. After a long breakfast with the other residents who chattered about trivial personal grievances, Ethan sought the comfort of solitude outside. The orphanage grounds, once his safe haven, felt foreign now. What if collaborating with Blake meant exposing himself, his thoughts, emotions, vulnerabilities? For a boy who had spent years building walls around his heart, this was not a light decision. He walked toward the old swing set, its creaking chains echoing the uncertainties swirling within him. As he settled down, he tried to engage his imagination, channeling the wealth of stories that had once flowed freely from his pen. Yet creativity demanded freedom, and he couldn't ignore the knot in his stomach, the turbulence of fear wrapped around his resolve. "Ethan!" A voice jolted him from his thoughts. It was Kiera, one of the older kids at the orphanage, her determination evident in every stride she took toward him. "What's up?" he managed, forcing a smile. "I overheard you talking to that billionaire guy yesterday. You're not thinking of working with him, are you?" She perched herself on the swing next to his, a frown creasing her brow. Ethan hesitated, meeting her gaze filled with concern. Kiera understood the orphanage's world, the struggles, the yearning, but she didn't fully grasp what Blake represented. "I don't know yet," he replied cautiously. "He could help me with my writing." "Or use you for some publicity stunt," she countered, her voice sharp. "You know how rich people think, right? They don't care about us. They just want to feel good about themselves." Her words struck deeper than he expected. Could Blake's interest be purely selfish? Was he merely searching for a pet project, a tale of redemption by associating with a struggling writer, instead of genuinely wanting to learn from him? Clarity seized Ethan, galvanizing his thoughts. Kiera's skepticism mirrored his doubts, yet it also ignited a fire within him. If Blake was sincere, this could be an opportunity to challenge both their narratives. If he chose to engage, it wouldn't be just for vulnerability's sake. It would be a two-way street of growth. They could both draw from each other's stories. "Maybe I'll talk to him again," Ethan said, his voice steadier. "Maybe we both need to discover what we're capable of. Change our narratives." Kiara raised an eyebrow, still wary. But Ethan felt invigorated by the idea of moving past fear. He returned inside, mental gears grinding toward a new plan. As he sat back down with his notebook, a determination surged within him. He was ready to explore this uncertain path with Blake, but on his own terms. Later that day, Ethan picked up his phone, his fingers lingering above the screen before hitting call. With each dial tone, he felt an adrenaline rush. This could lead to something profound, or it could explode in his face. Yet the only way to find out was to push through his reservations and embrace the ambiguity. As Blake's voice filled his ear, a thrill coursed through him. "Ethan here," he began, bracing himself for a conversation that could reframe both their stories, but uncertainty wrapped around him like a thick fog. "Blake," he continued, resolve fortifying his voice, "I think we need to talk." As the words slipped out, he realized he was at a precipice, a moment that would either bind them in mutual growth or lead him to the cliffs of disappointment. What awaited him on the other side of that call began to take shape in his mind. A narrative daring to unfold with the possibility of being truly seen for the first time in his life. But what awaited him after he took that leap of faith? Would stepping into the unknown allow him to break free from his own burdens, or would it only deepen the shadows that lingered? Ethan set the phone down, his heart racing as he absorbed the weight of his own words. There was no turning back. He had lit a fuse and was now waiting for the explosion. He paced the small room he shared at the orphanage, the once safe confines starting to feel claustrophobic under the gravity of his decision. The idea of collaboration with Blake was tantalizing, yet fraught with peril. Would he expose himself? What if Blake's interest wasn't genuine? What if he was just another adult looking to find a good story in the brokenness of orphanage life? The afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting orange hues against the drab walls. Ethan shook his head to clear it. Hanging on to his doubts would only stall the momentum he had finally gathered. He grabbed his notebook and a pen, determined to pour out his fears onto the pages. Writing had always been his refuge, a space where he could explore feelings without judgment. As he scribbled, a familiar itch for storytelling took over. The boundaries defining his narratives began to dissolve. What if he wrote not just about the life he had, but about the life he could create moving forward? Words flowed unrestrained as he framed the story of a young boy standing at a crossroads, preparing to carve out a path with someone as unexpected as a self-made billionaire. Minutes turned into hours, and the sun had set by the time he finally paused, looking at the pages filled with scrawled thoughts and burgeoning characters. There was an evolution taking place, not just in his aspirations, but within his very identity. He was no longer merely the orphanage boy. He was Ethan, an emerging voice ready to confront the world, his world and Blake's. The following day was marked by a palpable sense of anticipation. Ethan replayed his conversation with Blake on loop in his mind, analyzing every inflection in his voice, every hesitation. Was he really prepared for the next conversation? The stakes felt higher, amplified by his imagination. What if he was not enough? What if Blake saw through him, recognizing the unfounded foundation behind his writing ambitions? Unwilling to succumb to self-doubt, Ethan resolved to meet Blake in the same cafe where their paths crossed previously. It was familiar territory, a place where animated discussions brewed, cakes were served, and aspirations floated in the air like steam from cups of hot coffee. When Ethan arrived, his heart pounded in synchrony with the clinking of cups. Blake was already seated, his eyes scanning through a tablet, focused and engrossed. The moment Ethan approached, however, Blake looked up and smiled, a genuine smile that momentarily disarmed him. "Hey, Ethan, glad you could make it," Blake said, his tone revealing a warmth that felt inviting, yet simultaneously intimidating. "Thanks for having me, Blake," Ethan replied, swallowing hard. The words came out steadier than he felt, emboldening him to take a seat across from the man who represented opportunity and uncertainty in equal measure. As they exchanged greetings, Ethan fought the urge to reveal everything he had written in those rushed moments before this meeting. The hesitation hung in the air like a thick fog. What to say? He needed to find the right balance, showing ambition without stumbling into naivety. "So, tell me about your ideas," Blake encouraged, leaning forward with genuine interest. The moment opened a private chasm of vulnerability within Ethan. This was his chance to shape the conversation, to assert his vision while gauging Blake's intentions. "I want to explore narratives that bridge different worlds," Ethan began, wrestling his internal turmoil. "I believe that stories are powerful. They help us understand one another." Blake's brow raised, intrigued. "Sounds ambitious for a start," he replied. "What do you envision?" The words tumbled from Ethan's lips as he delved into his aspirations, observing Blake closely. Would he engage with the raw honesty or retreat back into the confines of his billionaire persona? Each question posed by Blake felt like a test, a gentle probe into Ethan's resolve, their fates now intricately entwined in this fragile inception of collaboration. As the conversation unfolded, there was a shift within Ethan. He was adapting, confronting apprehensions, revealing pieces of himself he thought had been tethered away. Could this truly become a partnership of growth, or was he merely crafting a narrative for his own comfort? Time raced forward, yet the deeper implications of their meeting began to seep into Ethan's consciousness. The realization dawned on him. He was wrestling with belief, not just in Blake's sincerity, but in his own journey, his own worthiness to be heard. He clenched his fists, reminding himself he was breaking ground, weaving a path others had tried to clear for him. "Blake," he said suddenly, his voice firm, "this could be incredible for both of us, but what's your true motivation here? How can I trust you?" The question hung heavy, hanging between them like a charged wire, daring Blake to respond truthfully. Ethan felt the weight of his inquiry echo in the air, much like the uncertainty that surrounded their fragile partnership. What would Blake reveal, and would it shatter the fragile web Ethan was trying to weave? The moment of revelation had arrived, and the next heartbeat felt monumental. For a heartbeat, the cafe felt suspended in time. Blake's smile faded, replaced by a contemplative expression, as if a mask had slipped, revealing something deeper beneath. Ethan's heart raced. Had he gone too far, too soon? "I admire your tenacity," Blake finally responded, but his voice lacked the buoyancy it had held moments earlier. "Trust is built over time, not given freely. I'm still figuring out what draws me to your story." The honesty in Blake's words stung. Ethan had hoped for an affirmation of trust, a pat on the back, but here was the billionaire acknowledging a truth that buried itself deeper into Ethan's insecurities. Could they really forge a partnership when the very foundation was enshrined in uncertainty? "I get that, but I need to know that you see me as more than just a story," Ethan pressed, searching Blake's eyes for connection, a hint of sincerity. "This isn't just about me. I want us both to benefit from this." The vulnerability in Ethan's admission set the air crackling. He was laying his cards on the table, exposing his ambitions, his hopes, yet still feeling as if he were teetering on a precipice. Blake scrutinized him, and for a moment, time seemed to still again. Then, with a slight nod, Blake leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate your honesty, Ethan. I believe in the power of stories, too. However, I want to make sure this will be worth it, not just for you, but also for my own vision. I have my own stake in this." Ethan's stomach churned. Was there more to Blake's motivations? The thought of being merely a pawn sent adrenaline rushing through him. He recalibrated. "I understand that, but my life isn't just a stepping stone for your next big project. If I'm to collaborate with you, I want it to reflect authenticity, my authenticity." Blake folded his arms, considering. "That's fair, but let me ask you this. What does authenticity look like for you in this partnership? What risks are you willing to take?" Ethan's mind whirled. The question was a mirror, reflecting insecurities intertwined with a budding confidence he had only begun to unearth. He felt exposed, yet electrified by the thought of talking about his dreams beyond the confines of the orphanage. "Authenticity means telling the truth unfiltered," he articulated, weighing each word. "It means sharing stories that challenge the way we see each other, showing our vulnerabilities instead of just presenting a polished exterior." "Interesting," Blake replied, leaning forward, intrigued. "So you're willing to dig deep, to expose parts of yourself that others may shy away from?" "Yes," Ethan asserted, then hesitated. "But it's terrifying. I face judgment nearly every day. My past hangs over me like a ghost. What if it affects how you see me?" He searched Blake's gaze for understanding, hoping to meet an ally in a world filled with uncertainty. "Fear does that," Blake replied softly. "It can be crippling, but fear can also serve as a catalyst for immense growth. If you're willing to overcome that fear, I think we have something worth exploring." His tone shifted slightly, becoming almost conspiratorial. "But know this, Ethan, you will be challenged. The journey we are talking about isn't smooth sailing." Ethan's pulse quickened at the prospect. Challenges were intimidating yet invigorating, the kind of push that could catapult him into the unknown, beyond the boundaries of his orphanage life. The thrill of possibility surged through him. "Bring it on," he managed, surprise at his own boldness emerging. "I'm prepared to embrace the challenge. If I can survive the orphanage, I can definitely handle whatever this partnership throws my way." As they exchanged knowing glances, a realization dawned. This arrangement could be a crucible for transformation, not just for his story, but potentially for Blake's as well. But the moment of shared conviction was fragile, the threads of their partnership straining at the seams.
What could lay ahead if they both waded into this uncharted territory together? Would their shared ambition drown them in doubt, or catalyze a wave of change that could reshape both their lives? Ethan leaned forward, clinging to anticipation. "What's our first step?" he asked, resolute. Blake smiled, a glimmer of determination igniting his features. "Let's begin by outlining your story, the parts you're afraid of. It's time to unearth the truths you've buried." As the prospect twisted exhilaratingly before him, questions flickered through Ethan's mind like wildfire. What hidden depths would be revealed? Would their partnership stand the tumult that could lie ahead? Ethan's heart raced, a thrilling concoction of fear and excitement. The uncharted course stretched before him, and he felt
the call to embrace it. The time had come to face the unknown head-on, to uncover not just the truths within his story, but also the unforeseen truths in Blake's narrative. Ethan's thoughts raced as he settled deeper into the cafe's worn leather chair, heart thumping in sync with the bustling atmosphere around him. The prospect of sharing his story, peeling back layers that had sheltered him for years, overwhelmed him. The stakes felt higher than ever, but so did the chance to redefine his path. "What parts should I start with?" he asked, feeling suddenly vulnerable, as though he had just stripped away protective armor in a battlefield. Blake considered him thoughtfully, tapping his fingers against the table. "Start with the moment that defined you, the before that led to the now. What shaped your beliefs, and where do you want to go from here?" Taking a deep breath, Ethan found himself transported back to the orphanage, that place where shadows loomed large and laughter often felt like a distant echo. He saw the faces, the caretakers who had been both harsh and nurturing, the other children who had forged alliances wrapped in the innocence of shared hardships. "The moment I realized life wasn't just about survival was when," he began, his voice gaining steadiness as he spoke. "There was a boy, Jake. He taught me the importance of friendship in the most unexpected way. One day, during a particularly harsh winter, he handed me his last pair of socks, saying I needed them more than he did." Blake's eyes didn't waver. He listened intently, and that focus pushed Ethan further into the well of memories. It wasn't just about physical warmth. It made me realize that kindness could exist even in the unkindest environments. I started to view the world differently after that, more nuancedly. Instead of merely reacting to the chaos, I learned to seek those small moments of grace. "Wow," Blake murmured, "that's impactful. You took an adversity and made it a beacon of hope. But how does that define your ambitions now?" Ethan paused, contemplating how to articulate the evolution of his dreams. "My vision is about sharing those truths, those moments of humanity. In a world that constantly tries to divide us, I want to foster understanding through storytelling. I believe personal narratives can create connections between people, between experiences." As he spoke, something in him shifted. The tension began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose. It was interesting that sharing could feel this liberating, that placing those moments in the hands of another could forge a deeper understanding. Blake nodded, clearly impressed. "You understand the power of your voice then. But what about the darker moments, the things that still cling to you? It's not just about the highlights, it's about the grit, the pain. Vulnerability isn't just relatable, it builds trust." Ethan hesitated, the heaviness of his past tightening around his chest. "There's a part of me that asks whether disclosing that pain makes me weak. The fear of judgment still looms. I've worked so hard to rise above it." Blake leaned in, his expression serious. "But wouldn't acknowledging those shadows make your light shine brighter? What if you confronted them instead of letting them curtain your potential?" The challenge hung thick in the air. A choice hovered before Ethan. Retreat into the familiar safety of avoidance, or step forward and confront feelings he had buried for so long. "What if showing my darkness reveals more than I'm ready to share?" "It will,"
Blake said unequivocally. "But in doing so, you'll discover truths about yourself that could transform not just your narrative, but how others perceive themselves through your lens." Ethan felt a surge of apprehension, but within it lay an exhilaration that was intoxicating. He could feel the prospect of growth tingling at his fingertips. This moment could redefine the axis of his story. "What if I embrace the shadows?" he mused aloud, curiosity igniting a spark in his chest. "What if facing my fears allows me to become a vessel for more profound change?" "Now you're speaking my language," Blake encouraged. "That's the kind of authenticity I'm looking for." As Ethan's resolve solidified, he realized they were standing at a precipice not only of his story, but also of their shared journey, a fusion of vulnerability and partnership. The idea of merging their narratives began to feel less intimidating and more awakening. "What happens next?" Ethan asked. Excitement rippled through him like an electric current. Blake's eyes glimmered with an energy that matched Ethan's burgeoning fire. "Next, we dive deeper. I'll challenge you to write a piece that captures your journey, your fears, your stories, the raw, unfiltered truth. Let's see how far we can stretch your boundaries." Ethan's heart raced, a mix of thrill and trepidation. He could feel the tide turning, pushing him towards truth. The blank page before him beckoned, pregnant with the possibility of revelations he had not yet begun to fathom. As they mapped out their next steps, an unsettling thought danced at the edge of Ethan's mind. Can the shadows truly morph into something illuminating, or would they remain a weight, pulling him back into the darkness? The uncertainty loomed ever larger, demanding a confrontation he could no longer evade. Ethan returned to the cafe a few days later, armed with a notebook and an urgency to write. The weight of his shadows lingered, but so did a burgeoning sense of resolve, as if the act of confronting his past could lead him to places he never thought possible. He settled into the same leather chair, the rich scent of coffee mingling with the faint aroma of old books lining the walls. As he flipped open the notebook, he wasn't just blankly staring at sheets of paper. He felt the pressure of potential. For the first time, it felt like a catalyst instead of a burden. What to write first? The question lingered in his mind like
an overripe fruit, full of promise but needing the right cut to release its essence. He began with Jake, the boy who had shown him the profound meaning of friendship. His pen moved fluidly, the words pouring out in a chaotic rush, capturing Jake's selflessness and warmth on cold winter days. Yet, as the ink flowed, punctuated by the rhythm of his thoughts, Ethan couldn't ignore the darker undertones creeping in. Would he do justice to the complexities of his childhood? A surge of doubt threaded through his excitement. "Remember, Ethan," he murmured to himself, "vulnerability breeds connection." Blake's encouragement echoed in his head and propelled him forward. He wrote about the other children, the laughter interwoven with tears, the moments of betrayal that felt relentless. Each word chipped away at the facade of invulnerability he had nurtured for so long. It was cathartic, yet terrifying. As he worked, the cafe around him faded. Other patrons, their conversations became a muted backdrop. The small table transformed into a vessel for his struggle and growth. He grappled with the thought of revisiting the pain of his past, of exposing those raw edges. Would it make him imperfect, or would it finally liberate him from the chains of avoidance? His fingers paused, hovering over the page. Reflection seeped in. Who was he without those shadows? Could these experiences define him rather than limit him? The idea of embracing his past coalesced into something more resonant. It could empower him to rise, to lead others toward their own truths. With newfound determination, he recalled moments that made him feel trapped, the feelings of abandonment that echoed in his childhood home. They flooded his mind like a tide, unsanctioned and merciless. He penned the memory of listening to the sounds of other families playing, while hoping for a flicker of that same joy. But he didn't shy away from those painful moments. Instead, he leaned in, inviting the wounds to breathe on the page. A realization dawned as he wrote.
It wasn't about eliminating the shadows, it was about bringing them to light. The act of sharing his pain could unlock understanding, both in himself and in anyone who would read his story. Just as Jake's kindness had buoyed his spirits during those cold months, perhaps Ethan's narrative could help others navigate their own struggles. As the sun dipped lower, he could feel the weight of those memories lessening, transforming into something tangible. He was beginning to awaken to an empowering truth. His pain didn't diminish the beauty of his journey. It enriched the narrative, adding depth and resonance. With growing enthusiasm, he turned the page, ready to dive into the next chapter of his life. But as he began to reflect on which darkness to confront next, he felt a familiar shadow rise. Doubts gnawed at the edges of his burgeoning confidence. What if delving deeper seized him in a net he couldn't escape? What if he found parts of himself best left undiscovered? The uncertainty settled heavily in his gut, amplifying the intoxicating prospect of revelation. Would he have the courage to confront the shadows that still threatened to consume him? As the cafe emptied and night began to encroach, Ethan found himself at a crossroads. The next words could either break him or set him free, but he was determined to find out. The real question now gripped him. What lay hidden in those dark corners, waiting to be uncovered? Ethan closed his notebook, the page trembling under the weight of his unresolved thoughts. The cafe was cloaked in shadows, and the muted sounds of clinking cups and low conversations had dulled into a background hum, almost mocking him. As he stared into his half-drunk cup of coffee, the unmistakable urgency to probe deeper into those corners of his past pulsed within him. He found himself grappling with an overwhelming feeling. Each potential revelation seemed to act as both a lure and a warning. He had courage, or so he had convinced himself. But could that courage withstand the storm of self-exposure? Moments of vulnerability had never been easy for him. Ethan shifted in his seat, discomfort coiling in his stomach. Would he, like so many times before, evade the deeper truths in favor of the safer, more palatable parts of his narrative? No, this was different. An ember of determination ignited inside him, urging him to transcend the superficial. He recalled a conversation with Blake where they had discussed authenticity as a driving force in effective storytelling. "You can't inspire unless you're ready to be inspired yourself," Blake had said with conviction. Now the words resonated deeply. The honesty Ethan sought in his writing demanded authenticity in the way he lived. He opened the notebook again. This time he would write about the orphanage, about the place that had shaped his childhood in both bitter and benevolent ways. The memories were more fragmented, like jagged shards of glass waiting to slice through the veneer of perfected memories. As he began to write, he felt his heart quicken. The pungent scent of abandonment mingled with the sweetness of the community he had found among the other children, each narrative thread begging to intertwine. Ethan plunged into recollections of the darkened hallways, whispering secrets about dreams and fears he shared with the other children. He recalled the way sunlight streamed through dusty windows, illuminating the paths to the playground, where laughter and tears wove a complex tapestry of shared joy and suffering. The hollow feeling of fear and the deep craving for acceptance merged seamlessly, creating a backdrop that rivaled the emotional intensity of his youth. He paused, suddenly hit with the reality of what he was tapping into. This was not just his story. It was a collective memory, an unvoiced experience of many. He could summarize the agony and triumph, weaving threads of resilience into a coherent narrative that could not only represent his past, but also speak to others still trapped in their own shadows. Yet insecurity gnawed at him like rats seeking shelter in a storm. Would those he wrote about recognize their stories in his words? Would they feel exposed, or would they be empowered? A familiar dread settled in. What if he did a disservice to their experiences? The fear of judgment crept back in. In a moment of abandon, he tore a page from his notebook. He scrawled words of reassurance to himself.
What you write today can help tomorrow. The ink felt liberating. It was a promise to himself, a declaration that vulnerability could lead to connection and perhaps healing for others. With a swift determination, Ethan began to outline the pivotal moments of his life within the orphanage. Each stroke of the pen felt like a step toward reclaiming pieces of himself that had been buried. The act of explaining his existence in that world felt exhilarating yet frightening. He was on the verge of unveiling truths that had shaped his character in ways he was just beginning to understand. Was he ready to confront the repercussions of this exploration? Did he want to revisit the feelings of inferiority, the shame of needing help, and the disillusionment of misplaced trust? The question clawed at him, but the stakes felt higher each moment he wrote. Deep inside, a mantra began to form. To understand oneself is the first step toward healing. To share that understanding is the leap toward growth. He couldn't shy away now. He wouldn't. The sun had set, but within those dark corners of his past, light awaited. And as he turned to face that darkness, a single thought echoed. What awaited him there could either cement his fears or transform them into the foundations of a new beginning. The next chapter of his life beckoned, fraught with uncertainty, yet pulsing with the potential for liberation. Would he emerge stronger or remain forever ensnared by the shadows? Ethan sat in front of his notebook, pages filled with the raw reflections of his past, and realized he was not just recounting his experiences, he was reclaiming them. The spaces he had once perceived as dark chasms of despair were now being illuminated by the transformative power of storytelling. Writing had carved a new path through his memories and revived his buried confidence. Fueled by the weight of every painted picture, he could feel the surge of resilience coursing through him. Each word ebbed and flowed with newfound clarity as he revisited moments of vulnerability and strength. He no longer feared the shadows. Instead, he beckoned them, inviting the specters of his childhood to join him in this newly forged narrative of hope. As the days turned into weeks, he continued to fill page after page, confronting the emotions that had haunted him. The echoes of laughter squashed by sorrow, the connections built in the midst of struggle, and finally, the moments that showcased unwavering courage. With each exploration of his past, he unearthed insights that made him feel whole. Again, no longer just the orphanage boy, but a dynamic storyteller with a message to share. One afternoon, the cafe buzzed with the usual crowd, but Ethan felt a hush blanket his mind as he prepared to meet Blake once again. He had worked tirelessly on a piece, an eloquent reflection of his journey, woven with intricate threads of fear and courage. This was a moment he awaited, not just to present his narrative, but to forge a partnership that resonated with sincerity and purpose. In the corner of the cafe, he spotted Blake seated at their usual table, a familiar tablet resting before him. As Ethan approached, Blake's eyes lit up with curiosity, and he gestured for Ethan to sit. "I was hoping you'd bring something today," Blake began, his tone tinged with excitement, tinged with seriousness. "I've been thinking deeply about our last conversation and how authenticity can guide our project." Ethan nodded, a blend of anticipation and apprehension unfolding within him. "I finished a piece I want to share, but it might challenge both of us in unexpected ways," he admitted, placing the notebook on the table with trembling hands. Blake leaned forward. "I want to hear it. I believe in the power of narratives and how they can shape change." With sincerity anchoring his words, Ethan began to read, allowing the raw essence of his childhood struggles and triumphs to spill forth. He faced Blake not just as a mentor, but as a partner invested in this mutual journey. Each sentence dripped with vulnerability, wielding the truth that had once felt suffocating. And as he read, he could feel the transformative magic of this collaboration blooming. Blake was not just listening, he was immersing himself in the tides of Ethan's life. When he finished, silence enveloped them, like a soft blanket. Ethan searched Blake's face, seeking validation. "What do you think?"
he asked, heart racing. Blake sat back, a thoughtful expression etched across his features. That was powerful, Ethan. You've taken a narrative of pain and turned it into a beacon of strength. Your voice carries weight. The world needs to hear this. The words struck a chord within him, igniting confidence he had long yearned for. He had achieved more than mere storytelling. He had become a voice for the voiceless. "Thank you for trusting me with this," Blake continued. "Now let's shape it further. I want to ensure it reaches a broader audience. This narrative could inspire many and create connections through shared experiences." Ethan's heart swelled with pride, his initial doubts evaporating in the warmth of Blake's encouragement. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of solid confidence take root, substantiated by the recognition of his competence as a storyteller. They began planning on how to present the narrative. Diving deeper than mere words, they discussed formatting it into a dialogue that featured collaboration, illustrating the intersections between their lives. In those moments, Ethan sensed he was no longer the boy lost in
shadows. He was carving a clear path towards success. He had transitioned from crafting stories in the confines of his imagination to creating real-world impact. The partnership with Blake transcended their initial connection. It was evolving into a venture that could change lives. As the project came together, Ethan received local recognition for his writing, capturing headlines that labeled him a young prodigy whose tales had the power to bridge divides. That achievement solidified his presence in a world he had once thought forbidden, marking his transition from an orphanage boy to an author empowered by his own story. Ethan beamed with pride during interviews, channeling his growth into a narrative of hope that resonated strongly with others. He demonstrated that vulnerability could indeed fuel strength, and in taking ownership of his experiences, he could profoundly impact those still navigating the shadows of their past. The culmination of their work led to a final presentation where both his heartfelt words and Blake's resources illuminated an auditorium filled with listeners. Their eyes glinted with empathy and recognition. Ethan stood before an audience, no longer uncertain, but pulsing with the confidence of someone who had conquered his demons. As he concluded the presentation, swelling applause thundered around him. Ethan realized he had not only shared his story, he had forged a new identity steeped in authenticity and strength. He had proved to himself that he could transcend the label of orphanage boy through his resilience, entirely rewriting his narrative. It was in that moment of fulfillment that Ethan understood he had emerged not just for himself, but as a beacon for others who felt lost. He had transformed deeply and victoriously. The words echoed in his mind, "I am enough. I am powerful." Now, standing boldly in his achievements, the path ahead glittered with possibilities. And as he looked out at the audience, he knew he had conquered more than just his past. He had paved the way for a future bursting with opportunity and connection. And right then, Ethan knew, this was just the beginning. Now is your moment. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help others discover these life-changing narratives. Comment your thoughts on this incredible conclusion. Share your reactions and theories. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see the power of personal transformation. Show your support for genuine storytelling. You are vital to this movement.